It's a real pleasure to be here today and have a chance to talk to you about our work, which could be much more simply titled, Kids and Families Do Better in Communities which Participate in Comprehensive Development Activities. The background of this study includes some subjects that have been discussed in detail at this meeting this week, including the fact that nutrition-sensitive agricultural interventions vary in their impact on child growth and diet, as well as the fact, as we've seen today, that household-level nutrition training programs also have variable success in improving these outcomes. We wondered what happens if these interventions would be combined. The intervention that we chose to look at is conducted by Heifer, Nepal, which over many years in Nepal has perfected their intensive community and social capital development, which is aimed at reducing poverty. Their work is based on livestock and values-based training in women's self-help group, and initially included absolutely no training on nutrition for children and for families. With the help from the Nutrition Innovation Lab, we have been able to study the impact of Heifer in several different communities in Nepal. And last year at this meeting, I had the chance to present some of the results of our first project, which formed the basis for the project I'm going to be presenting to you today. In this first project, we found quite conclusively, over 48 months of observation, that the intervention worked. Simply, we found an increase in household income and an increase in household wealth score related to the time of exposure to the Heifer intervention. And this, again, is over a 48-month time period. We also found that child minimal dietary diversity and animal source food consumption improved in relation to the duration of exposure to the intervention. And finally, after waiting 4 long years, we were able to see a decrease in undernutrition, stunting, underweight, and wasting decreased. But this was something that we found at the end line and not earlier in the study period. Well, these results raised a lot of questions for us, including the question whether child growth could be further improved and whether diet quality, particularly for children, could be further enhanced. We also really wondered how important was the community development component of Heifer's work to these child and household outcomes. Well, those questions were the genesis for Project 2. And before we embarked on Project 2, we realized if we really wanted to address nutrition, it might be a smart idea to include a nutrition training component. So this was developed here locally and was designed to be reinforced in the women's self-help groups by trained facilitators and included a number of practical demonstrations and didactic training. The methods of the present study are outlined on this slide. We reviewed a roster of communities in Banke district which had requested inputs from Heifer, Nepal, and selected some communities which were matched for specific characteristics and invited these communities to participate. The communities were then randomized into 3 clusters. The first cluster received the full Heifer program, which includes their intensive social capital development, the new nutrition training curriculum, and the traditional livestock training that Heifer is known for. The second group we called the partial group, and this group received the 2 forms of training, the nutrition training and the livestock training, in the absence of the social capital development. And the third group received none of these inputs and served as our control group. 5 household surveys were conducted over 33 months by an independent research organization, and you can see here the various household, child, and women's indicators that were collected, not all of which I'm going to discuss. The households were only included if the mothers had attended at least 75% of the trainings that had been provided. This slide shows the participants that were enrolled. There were about 6,000 household members and between 1,700 and 2,000 children. Children were enrolled as they were born into the eligibility criteria in these groups. At baseline, the community clusters were equivalent for some very important findings, including wealth score, income as divided per household member, soap use as a marker of hygiene habits, and adult animal source food consumption and dietary diversity. These household indicators changed from baseline to 33 months as shown on this slide. In this and the following series of slides, you'll see that the control group is indicated in green, the full Heifer program in blue, and the partial in purple. So you can see that wealth, soap use, and household, meaning adult diet diversity score, increased more in the Heifer group than in the other two groups. Food security also increased more in the Heifer group, and this was particularly interesting because the Heifer group happened to be significantly more food insecure at baseline. Here's the soap use that you see over the different rounds as an example of one of these items and how this separated out between the three groups. Child anthropometry at baseline differed a bit between the groups. You can see that height and weight z-scores were a bit better in the Heifer group, while head circumference and mu-x z-scores were a bit better in the partial group at baseline. But these growth indicators change from baseline to 33 months as illustrated on this slide. You can see that weight for height, head circumference, and mu-x z-scores improved more in the Heifer group, while height z-score did not, possibly because it was a bit better at baseline. Diet was equivalent at baseline in all three groups for diversity and ASF consumption. And you can see here the changes from baseline to 33 months for diet diversity and animal source food consumption. We then did some mixed effect modeling, adjusting for various child and household factors, as you see here. And after this modeling, we found that being in the intervention group predicted better growth outcomes for weight, height, and weight for height z-scores. We also found that being in the intervention group predicted greater improvement in child diet quality, specifically diet diversity and ASF consumption. I haven't spoken much about health, but I can also tell you that being in the intervention group, that's the full Heifer group, predicted greater improvement in child health, the number of episodes of diarrhea, respiratory illness, and fever. This study had several strengths and weaknesses. It was a longitudinal prospective study with a retention rate of greater than 96%, and data was collected by a consistent and independent research team. There were a number of weaknesses in this study, including the possible exposure to other programs in the area. This was a potential problem, as many programs are active in this part of Nepal at the current time. And there were some differences in the communities at baseline. Also, we did not conduct a separate validation of the nutrition training prior to embarking on this project. However, in summary, we can say that there were better outcomes seen in families which received the full package of Heifer intervention at both the child and household level. At the child level, there was more improvement in growth, specifically height, weight, and weight for height z-scores, better improvement in diet quality, ASF consumption, and dietary diversity, and health. The number of illness episodes decreased in this group. At the household, we saw greater increase in wealth, soap use, dietary diversity, and food security. In conclusion, we can say that an intensive, holistic intervention may be more effective in creating measurable and sustainable improvements in important child and household outcomes. However, we know that these are more costly and more difficult to implement. We hope to have the chance to come back next year and present some further analysis on this interesting data set. And I'd like to acknowledge the many organizations which helped us with this work: Heifer Nepal, Heifer International, Valley Research Group, and of course the Nutrition Innovation Lab. Most important are thanks to the participating families who put up with interviews over these 33 months. And thanks to our US government partners, and thanks to all of you.